questions 46 through 51. A historian has been invited to speak to an architecture class. The class has been studying the history of domestic architecture. Listen to part of the talk.
In New England today, around 80 houses that were built in the 17th century are still standing. Many of these houses and the documents relating to them have been thoroughly studied, and some of the houses have been carefully restored to their original condition. These early houses of New England are the greatest single source of knowledge about domestic architecture of the 17th century, particularly about details of plan and construction. All 17th century houses were not alike. There was some variety in their floor plans, with each house being shaped by the circumstances of the family and the characteristics of the site. Nevertheless, it's possible to identify the three most common plan types, which were the one-room plan, the two-room plan, and the added lean-to plan. We can even figure out the order in which they probably evolved. The one-room plan was the simplest and the earliest design. It was used in the early cottages at Plymouth and Salem, dating back to the 1620s, and it remained common in smaller and poorer dwellings throughout the century. In the one-room plan, the front door opened into a small entry room, which was then called the porch. In the porch, there was a steep staircase built up against a massive chimney. The large main room was a combination living, dining, cooking room called the hall. In this room, there was a huge fireplace set into the chimney mass. The staircase in the porch led to one large sleeping room upstairs. The second house design was the two-room plan, which was simply the one-room plan with a parlor added at the other side of the chimney and porch. The result was a house with two fireplaces, one in the hall and one in the parlor, that were set back to back in the central chimney structure. In several earlier examples of this design, the parlor was actually built onto an older one-room house, enlarging the smaller house. But more common in later examples, both rooms were built at the same time when families could afford it. Upstairs, there were two sleeping rooms, called the hall chamber and the parlor chamber, after the room below each. The third design, the added lean-to plan, was the result of an addition at the back of the house, making this the largest of the three plans. The lean-to addition had roof rafters leaning against the second-story wall of the main house. The added space was used as a kitchen. The cooking was done in a fireplace added to the back of the central chimney structure. There were two more rooms built on either side of the kitchen. On the cold side of the kitchen, there was a pantry for food storage, and on the warm side, facing the sun on the south, there was a bedroom. Above the kitchen, under the lean-to roof, there was attic space for storage or more sleeping rooms, which you reached by a staircase leading up from the kitchen. These three house plans form a logical evolutionary sequence. The one-room plan was the earliest design. Then the two-room plan was most common up until around 1650. By the year 1700, the lean-to plan was dominant. However, it's important to note that the one-room plan, although it came earliest, continued to be built throughout the 17th century. So it's best not to try to determine the age of a colonial house strictly by its plan type, which is not a perfect indicator of the house's age.
Number 46. According to the speaker, why are 17th century houses significant to architectural historians? Number 47. Where was the main staircase located in a 17th century house? Number 48. Why does the speaker say this?
In several earlier examples of this design, the parlor was actually built onto an older one-room house, enlarging the smaller house. But more common in later examples, both rooms were built at the same time when families could afford it.
Number 49. Identify the kitchen in the floor diagram of the added lean-to plan. Number 50. Based on the information in the talk, indicate whether each sentence below characterizes the one-room plan, the two-room plan, or the added lean-to plan. Number 51. Why does the speaker say this?
However, it's important to note that the one-room plan, although it came earliest, continued to be built throughout the 17th century. So it's best not to try to determine the age of a colonial house strictly by its plan type, which is not a perfect indicator of the house's age.